Hey, wealth builders, Simon Dixon here. I have had to do 2 consecutive emergency broadcasts. And when you see the words emergency broadcast, it's not clickbait. It means something clickbait. It means something important is happening. And today the news is that the New York Department of Financial Services, NYDFS, has demanded Paxos to stop issuing the BUSD, the Binance USD stablecoin. And at the same time, the SEC is suing Paxos for unregistered securities. So today we're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss that from a few different angles. Firstly, what does it mean? What does it mean for Bitcoin, crypto, stablecoins, the wider crypto markets? And as always, the wider, bigger picture, geopolitical, so that us as investors can start preparing for what comes next. So I'm going to jump into all that. Just before I do that, do me a favor, hit the like button. The more likes I get at the start of this, the more YouTube is likely to rank this. And I believe that this is actually a very important thing. That's why we are doing an emergency broadcast on the subject. So let's jump straight in. Right. So for those of you that are longer term subscribers to the channel, you'll know that I said, do not believe this bull market, what some people were calling a bull market, and feeling like all the contagion had rolled out. And a lot of the contagion had rolled out, but after every single contagion, if you are familiar with the cycles I've been talking about over the last decades being involved in Bitcoin, is that you have, once you have the contagion or the end of the event, is followed by a large regulatory crackdown. Now, the regulatory crackdown is not often completely priced into it because some people don't believe it will happen. And that happens in every cycle. Once you've got through the regulatory crackdown, we then have a consolidated sideways market where new investors decide what they're going to start investing in. And then the fundamentals of Bitcoin prevailing towards the halving cycle. But this is obviously the first time we've had it in a quantitative tightening cycle. And there's a few more cycle tests that I've covered, that I cover in my books as well, the one that I'm writing, that we need to get through. Anyway, I said that there are 3 things that we need to understand from the regulatory side until you can believe that this is a turnaround and a move towards a bull market that may not be priced in. And I said that 1 or 3 of them may happen. The first one was Digital Currency Group. The good news is I'm not going to cover that in this video. I'll cover that on my Friday weekly. But Digital Currency Group, a major company in the crypto sector, shareholder and investor in over 200 companies, they have come up with what I believe to be a really good restructuring plan. Shows what happens when you have professionals doing it, rather than trying to cover up all sorts of shady activities. The second thing I said to look out for is a resolution on what Binance is. And the third is a regulatory attack on the stablecoins. Now, it looks like they're combining Binance and stablecoins together through the issuance of BUSD, through some moves that were made by Binance recently that we covered in a previous video I did on the investigating Binance video as well. So it looks like we're getting all 3. Then you need to understand the outcomes of those to see how they are fully factored into the price. So let's just jump straight into it. Right. So what is the news that's happened over the weekend and today? Well, Paxos, if you're not familiar, it may not be a familiar brand because not many people use the Paxos stablecoin, but it is actually one of the best designed stablecoins. It is actually regulated as a trust bank as well, which means that it's non-fractional reserve. It means that you have an infrastructure for holding things in trust, and it was designed incredibly well. Now, it's interesting that this is the one that they are going after, and it's obviously due to the fact that they had a joint venture partnership with Binance. Now, what does the New York DFS, the Department of Financial Services, part of that mean? Well, they've told them that they're not allowed to issue any more BUSD, which is the Binance stablecoin. So the way that it would work is Binance wanted to get into the stablecoin business because Binance, if you think about it, when it originally launched way back in 2017, I was at the launch event when CZ was pitching the token and came up with the concept in Chengdu. One of the ideas was that it didn't have banking, and he believed that the crypto-to-crypto banking, exchange market has got large enough because banking has always been an issue from day one. People are saying that there's an attack on the banks for the crypto side at the moment. It's always been like that. But there is a very interesting trend that's happening on the USD side. It definitely seems like all of the corridors to USD are becoming more and more tightly scrutinized. That is a trend that we need to watch. I'll probably cover in another video. But asking them stable coins were the mechanism whereby you could have a market where you could go from one exchange to another. So you could have a Coinbase type exchange that was regulated and did have access to banking. You could convert your fiat there into a stable coin. And then when Bitfinex came up with the idea and purchased Tether and tried to get it forward, they were going around all the different exchanges saying we can make a more efficient arbitrage market where people can go from exchange to exchange. And so Binance used USDT as their mechanism, and this led to lots of issues when Tether got so large that it lost its banking. Wells Fargo decided to take a deliberate attack on it. It was banking in Taiwan at the time through some Taiwanese banks. And essentially Binance outsourced all of its banking issues to Tether and then started to diversify. And we had USDC, another company that I'm a shareholder in, Circle, that created a US-centric version of Tether. The other thing is, they're saying stop issuing. Okay, so that's a big deal. That normally implies that there is something that they really don't like, that they are investigating. And there was lots of hints when we had what's the name of that exchange that no one used that was taken down recently for $700 million of money laundering. Even forget the name. Okay, it will come back to me in a bit. Something that no one was using. There was this big announcement from the US government that they've taken it down, and they connected it to one of the largest companies that was putting volume over to that exchange was Binance. And then they've also launched a money laundering investigation. So there's clearly something that they don't like about the flow of funds at the moment with Binance. And there's a story I'm painting here that we need to understand that the government is going after here as well. It also, of course, can be just geopolitics, the exchanges in Russia, China, US obviously wants to control all the data. In the end of this video, we'll go through the more geopolitical impacts and longer term trends as a longer term investor. The other thing is that the SEC is suing it for being an unregistered security. Now, this is an interesting concept. Now, most people would think stablecoins are not securities because they're backed by dollars. Well, if they were just backed by dollars, then correct. But they're actually backed by dollars and dollar equivalents, which means that they invest in commercial paper, in treasuries, various other things, which would make it a form of a collective investment scheme. And therefore, the stable coins, by using those dollars, what do they need to do? Well, they need to remove certain risks when you're backing a stable coin. One is bank risk. So bank operates off fractional reserves. And therefore, if a bank goes bust, most companies are only insured through Federal Department Insurance Corporation, FDIC, up to $250. So once you go above $250,000 rather, then you start to hit the uninsured territory. So the only way to not have bank counterparty risk with your funds is to invest it in something else, like the US government. So lend it to the US government through US treasuries. They pay you a yield. The dollar operates off the world's largest regulated Ponzi scheme. So they always need to roll over the debt. So there is always a market for those products. Therefore you remove some of that counterparty risk. But at that time, it's backed by securities. So bonds are securities, they're low risk securities, but there's lots of different other types of products like money market funds and repo, where the banks lend to each other in times of, in the overnight markets and various money market, they call it, products. So the SEC is claiming that this makes it a security and that they did not register is most likely. So also the other concept is what happened with what Binance was doing. So Binance started to convert everybody's USDC stablecoin. So you had these different stablecoins, and whenever you deposited USDC at Binance, they would convert it to BUSD, the Binance stablecoin. That was built on top of Paxos, which is the one that's received the executive order. And so the SEC is saying that that's a security, and the New York DFS is saying that there's something you need to stop issuing. But what happened inside Binance is when they started converting that stablecoin, USDC, to BUSD, you now introduce centralization into the stablecoin where Binance could essentially, if they're not transparent or they're not, performing regulatory scrutiny, they could end up creating synthetic balances. I'm not saying they're doing this, but that is one way, and that was one of the big accusations behind Tether. The Bitfinex, the exchange, was creating synthetic balances that are, through this mechanism, and therefore they're probably making the opinion that whenever you have stable coins with a centralized company, you introduce layers of centralization that needs to be disclosed. And if you don't get full disclosure on that, like a company like Coinbase that is public, then it's open to scrutiny. So if they're not registered securities businesses where you have to disclose these types of things, or they're not registered banks where you have to have deposit insurance and you have to have various other mechanisms in place in order to do it, then they believe that that may be open to abuse. So some people might see this as an attack on stablecoins. I see it more of an attack on some of the centralized companies that are not adhering to, and obviously after what happened with FTX was painted as being this very compliant, regulated company, but it didn't comply with securities laws. So the state regulators went after FTX, saying that they're offering unregistered securities. And it turned out that they were an illegal bank, as we saw with Celsius, that FTX and Celsius were creating this illegal banking where they didn't have enough deposits because they said that when you deposit, the money is ours in Celsius's case, which meant that they were considering it as their own operational funds. And so by not separating operational funds and client funds, you had this complete conflict where you were an illegal bank, and therefore it's different. If you're not profitable with your own operations, then you raise finance to meet that. But if you don't have enough client money because you're investing it and then considering it yours, you're then selling securities. And if you actually don't have enough money and you're fractionally reserving, where you have less, you can't meet all your liabilities to customers, then that's a bank. And so this is why we had those models. Now, in the case of FTX, we saw that they were using client money even though they considered it custody, which is another level of fraudulent activity. So between those two cases, Celsius and FTX, you see the consequences. And so it looks like they're using because Paxos has created a stablecoin for Binance, they're using that as a backdoor mechanism for getting transparency in companies that operate outside of the US. Now, obviously as well, it looks like there's been lots of reports that when Binance needed liquidity for its stablecoin, it had to go to its international exchange. And so Dirty Bubble Media reported that BUSD was in fact not segregated correctly, and it is part of the Binance US. And remember, Binance US is the company that is being used to acquire Voyager, to exit those from Chapter 11, and they also put in a bid for Celsius to allow their customers to go through. So you've got these connections And obviously, the SEC and the DOJ and Treasury, they all put out these warning signs, come into compliance. But many of these companies just don't want to register as securities because it requires full disclosure, full transparency, or the SEC is not even allowing them to do that as well. So you've got this scenario that's being created right now. So let's look at Paxos. So now armed with that background, so what is Paxos? Well, Paxos, their big claim is that their stablecoin is not subject to bank risk. How do they do that? Well, they only put less than $250,000 is the claim into a bank. So, for example, if they had $1 million or $10 million in one of their banks, which is Silvergate, another publicly traded company, then they would have betrayed that promise. So their claim is that they only put up to $250,000. Now, one way around that is because it's a trust company, they could set up lots of segregated trusts, and each of them have a bank account that is subject to the $250,000 to fall within that FDIC limit, and that removes the exposure to bank failures. You know, the too big to fail and the exposure. Now, there is another risk there. Obviously, FDIC is not built for systemic risk like we saw in 2008. So it only insures 1% of all bank deposits. So in the case of a wider systemic issue, that would require that FDIC would fail as well. And it has in the past as well. It had to actually bail out the Savings and Loans DIC, SLDIC, in the past during the savings and loans crisis when the insurance didn't stand up. So the other way to hedge that risk is to invest in treasuries, as we said. And then you had this weird relationship whereby Binance was taking the USDC, converting it to BUSD, and exposing it to all sorts of strange issues where the transparency wasn't there. And I suspect that all of that combined together, they're using stablecoins as a mechanism for getting the transparency that they need because Binance is a non-US exchange. Okay, so that's what's happening, and those are the things to look after. I'm not sure that that's all factored into the price yet, and that's why I was skeptical of the bull market. But remember, if you are very familiar with my content on this channel, we always say that if you're a Bitcoin thinker and you don't think in terms of fiat, because you have your spending money covered, but your saving money is denominated in Bitcoin and you value your wealth in Bitcoin, like we teach everyone to do at Bank to the Future, then obviously all of these corrections allow you to accumulate more Bitcoin into your savings, which increases your Bitcoin wealth, which is the goal in holding digital hard sound money. So any corrections as a result of these events, you as an individual need to be prepared that it's a good thing. If your dollar buys you more Bitcoin and you value your wealth in Bitcoin, then this progresses you financially at the expense of these crazy things that are happening. Right, so let's have a think about this in terms of impact on stablecoins. Well, one thing we'd expect to see is that Binance will probably shift back from BUSD to either USDT or USDC. Now, what are those two different things? Well, USDT is issued by Tether, and Tether is considered, in my mind, an enemy to the United States. Now, yes, it is a money service business. As part of it is registered there. They have started releasing all of their transparency. It is deeply connected with the Bitfinex exchange in terms of similar management. Full disclosure, I'm a shareholder in Bitfinex. I'm one of the earlier and USDC circle as well. But USDT has made it a massive effort. So people judge it on what it is in the past. But you can actually get the transparent. It's BDO does a top auditor does the attestation statements, and so you can get all that information. It wasn't like that in the past, but they've certainly done a lot in order to address the transparency concerns there as well. But USDT and USDC are the perfect hedges against each other. If it turns out that the US is going to take a really big attack on the US stablecoin market by considering it a security, then using it as a security doesn't really fulfill the original need of a stablecoin. But USDT has started to implement travel rules and various other things that are coming. There's essentially a big regulator of the regulator called Financial Action Task Force. And FA is called FATF, Financial Action Task Force. They're kind of the regulator of regulators. So the US agenda is implemented globally through FATF. And so, USDT have implemented those travel rules and various other things that are coming to stablecoins, so it can try and implement the status quo. But if they're going to be securities in the case of the US, that has a real impact on the market. The first thing it does is it means that the exchange of them would have to move to security token exchanges. So I've been a big investor in the security token market. We did funding rounds at Bank to the Future for companies like Securitize, and there are various other security token exchanges. We did a round with T0, and there's also met with Barry Silbert, brother Alan Silbert, when he was looking to launch the IPO for INX. It would be these exchanges where you could convert your fiat to what they consider a security in the future. So those companies like Circle or Tether, if it becomes a security and they want to allow for the convertibility, the redemption into dollars, that would either have to be done through a security token exchange, or they'd have to become registered securities businesses themselves in order to facilitate that as well, or drive it all to high net worth investors and accredited investors in order to use some of those exemptions that exist for that. So that would be the first move. You'd have to move everything to a security token exchange. Radical shift in the crypto to crypto exchange market. The other thing that could happen is you would need to, took some notes here. You could implement into the protocol much of the work that's been done in terms of on-chain KYC. So if you needed to eliminate the US, one option, you could sanction through stablecoins US investors and Chinese investors. If you wanted to continue using it if you wanted to continue using it without violating US securities laws, within the protocol, you'd have to sanction all US users. Obviously the exchange in China, the two biggest jurisdictions, you may have to continue implement a sanction into the stable coins, and then implement on-chain KYC in order to meet the requirements of the travel rule. So remember, the travel rule is whenever you send it, you need to know the centralized company needs to know where it's going. And if they're not a registered security, they have to have a register as a security business, or they'd have to implement some kind of way of knowing that US people aren't using those stable coins. So this is a real radical shift. Fortunately, we've been working on building this industry, but I hope and I do believe that more progressive countries, for example, El Salvador, where they made Bitcoin legal tender, and then they had a registration for virtual assets, and FATF has been recommending all around the world jurisdictions to implement virtual asset service provider regimes, which I think is way more fit for purpose than securities. So if you had virtual asset service provider regimes incorporating centralized companies registering and adding a bit more disclosure requirements, then that would avoid the need to go through the full-blown securities requirements as well. But that's a disjointed process. That's not happening on a global scale. The other thing to be aware of as well, so that's one thing you could do, is either going to drive things into the decentralized version, but then the decentralized would have to ensure that they're not engaging in unregistered securities, because then the SEC has already started to come after the coders between DEXs and DeFi contracts. That's already started. The SEC will probably continue to do that. So they don't want this to be a mechanism for circumventing, all the securities laws, particularly in the wake of FTX and Celsius and everything that came from that. The other thing to be aware of as well is if these stablecoin issuers were using the banks, the main bank that they were using for BUSD, my understanding, and USDC, and some parts of Tether as well, was Signature. And obviously that was a part of the back end of FTX. If you've been following the share price of Signature, Signature was a traditional bank. It's a fractional reserve bank. And it went public around about 2019 at about $12. During the bull market, it went up to a peak of about $220, giving people over 1,000x returns on their listing. But during the contagion and the FTX, it's come back down to approximately $12. Haven't looked at the share price today. And it had, its deposit base went down. I think they had about $8 billion of withdrawals. Now, remember, this is a fractional reserve bank. And so fractional reserve banks can face run-on banks, do have FDIC insurance, but there is a systemic risk there on the deposits over $250,000, as I covered earlier. So we really need to understand, and remember the DOJ launched an investigation quite some time back into Tether, but also into Signature Bank more recently as a result of FTX. So I still believe that these stable coins and their relationship with the different exchanges still has an element of contagion that we need to factor in, which obviously, if you're a Bitcoin thinker, is a good thing in terms of your long-term accumulation of Bitcoin as digital hard sound money backed by proof of work, which is why we were so insistent as an industry in keeping it decentralized, not increasing the block size, ensuring that there's a large network of nodes so that we could have this digital hard sound money to fulfill the most important use case. So stable coins can fulfill the median of exchange and unit of account use case, and Bitcoin needs to fulfill the store of value. And then there's the innovation on the wider crypto markets in order to increase the utility. But the reality is the situation we are in today is that there can be no more issuance of the BUSD until New York say so. There is a court case or, the SEC is suing for claiming that it is a security. And we have this systemic risk of whether it has contagion in the fractional reserve market, what impact that can have. And then we've got to look at the wider, the wider trends in terms of the global geopolitical and macro environment. So back to finally on the geopolitical side. So we've gone down to the micro of crypto. Another thing to consider in terms of impact is that if there is a full-blown US attack on stablecoins, if this continues in the US, one would only, after the initial reaction, because of the contagion that would have on the crypto-to-crypto exchanges, one of the impacts would be that, lost my trail of thoughts. Got distracted myself on the crypto-to-crypto markets. Yes, okay, thought of it. Is after the initial shock, the logical thing that most people would do is convert that into Bitcoin, or maybe Ethereum if the DeFi, you'd imagine that all the DeFi stuff that that's integrated with stables would use Ethereum as the backbone, and those that were there for the long-term store of value would be converting their stables into Bitcoin. So after the initial shock, you'd imagine that either people would be exiting and redeeming for fiat currency, or converting it all into Bitcoin and Ethereum. And so I'd expect all of those to have, a bit of a push once people understand the grander, more long-term part of this. But we always need to keep the bigger picture in mind. How does this impact Bitcoin? So in the end, long-term, it can only, from my perspective, drive buy-in pressure from stables to Bitcoin. I think it would create a big correction depending on how severe the attack gets and how far it goes. it would create, so there'll be definitely an initial shock, which, as always, the way to do this is how we've always taught. Accumulate every month. Don't worry about the FUD or the news or the real news or whatever's happening. This is about a longer term geopolitical game here. And as I said, everything would go over to security token exchanges, and you probably have more innovation in terms of KYC and artificial intelligence in the DeFi space in order to detect that, but it wouldn't be too decentralized. And that's why we always said a shift to proof of stake is not likely to create the decentralizing effect that proof of work can achieve or has achieved. But also, we've got to look at the bigger geopolitical picture. So this all started really when I think Facebook decided to launch its own basket of stable coins or its own world currency called Libra. And that created a really big impact in both sides. So firstly, Europe and America, they went absolutely berserk. They had Senate hearings. Everyone was asking Mark Zuckerberg their plans. It would have become the biggest bank in the world. Facebook has approximately 2.96 billion users. That's approximately 37% of the world's population. So Facebook becoming an issuer of a currency would make Facebook the world reserve currency, no doubt about it. So obviously, there was a massive impact on that, but it had two impacts. The firstly was the US started to go further down the rabbit hole. If you go back to some of my earlier emergency broadcasts, and by the way, if you want to catch up on all of the emergency broadcasts and see the whole picture, the very first one was on the IMF calling for Bretton Woods 2 and the larger geopolitical impacts and a shift to central bank digital currencies. Go to retirementplanb.com/book. It's a site which I created to give away the book, the first published book in the world that I created that published Bitcoin, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. That was published in 2011 and forecasted central bank digital currencies before the word was a term, modern monetary theory, Facebook becoming a bank, and of course got so many into Bitcoin. It had the Mandarin version that got a lot of people in China into Bitcoin before the ban. You can also get all the emergency broadcasts there. This is where we upload them and various other things. So there we go. Azad's put that on the screen. You can go there, create a membership site. We put it all in the membership site. We're going to be revamping this soon to a different domain, but here's where you can get all the free stuff for those that want to stay up to date with all this stuff. Right, so let's get back to the larger geopolitical picture. So you've got the US. One of the emergency broadcasts was on the executive order and the impact that that has, the crypto executive order. And one of the key things was investigating FedCoin and the US central bank digital currency. Now, when Libra was announced, they wanted to back it. Facebook wanted to back it by a basket of currencies, but they missed out one currency. They wanted to do it backed by US dollars, the Swiss franc, the euro, the British pound, various other currencies, I think the Singapore dollar, but they missed out the Chinese yuan or renminbi, depending on if it's the domestic or international one. So China's currency was missed out. Now, China started their work on central bank digital currencies before anyone. They started in 2014 in what I call Bitcoin Cycle 2. When Libra missed out China from the backing of the currency, which remember, the IMF special drawing rights includes the China yuan as part of the backing, but Facebook missed it out, obviously for political reasons, because they didn't think it would get through. This went through where China started really pushing forward their desire to launch their central bank digital currency. And in 2019, they launched DCEP, which is their central bank digital currency. In reaction to this, the US did their executive order this geopolitical play going on, where, for example, the Federal Reserve thinks that there's no innovation needed in digital money. But remember, what central bank digital currencies are. This is where so many people get it wrong. It's not an attack on Bitcoin. It does not compete with Bitcoin. It's not digital hard sound money. It is the biggest attack on banking the world has ever seen, since the government's blessed banks with the ability to create money through fractional reserve banking. So this is an attack on fractional reserve banking. This is central banks becoming banks, issuing wallets at the expense of retail and commercial banks. Central bank digital currencies, as I've always said and always warned people since 2011, since I started covering the topic, is a hedge against a bank failure and an FDIC failure. And so an FDIC and bank failure in a systemic risk event, we wouldn't get a bailout from my perspective. We'd get an unwinding of the banking system and a replacement with central bank digital currencies. Now, the Fed didn't take it as seriously. China has been taking it very seriously, to the point right now where approximately there's 220 million wallets in China that has the DCEP wallet downloaded. And in beta, they've done $15 billion of transactions. Now, that is absolutely nothing, because China already has mobile money rolled out through WeChat and Alipay. WeChat and Alipay have approximately 1.7 billion customers or downloads that are using that as the predominant financial system. DCEP and China, the PBOC, is already meeting and started integrations with the 7 largest banks, Alipay, WeChat, Tencent, Baidu. The largest companies are all getting ready to roll it out. So what is the bigger macro picture? Remember that the IMF has been, using as a mechanism for the US in order to get dollar loans across the world so that they can have the hyper-dollarization. Well, China's also launched their own Belt and Road Initiative, and that Belt and Road Initiative is most likely going to be tied to adoption of DCEP in those countries. So if you want to borrow money from China through the Belt and Road Initiative across Asia, across Africa, across the various other politically allied countries that are taking these initiatives loans for infrastructure projects, they're going to have to download DCEP too as well. And so you've got this geopolitical world reserve currency map, and stablecoins are the thing that is the biggest geopolitical risk as well. Now, it is my personal belief that the countries that win the race, and I'll cover more in other videos, will be the ones that do the most convertibility integration and freedom orientation in those. But I'll cover that in a very different video. I was writing about that in my new book, which is going to be coming out this year. So make sure you register to the website if you want to be on the newsletter to be first to receive that. It's been a decade in the making, really. And I think this all ties into the larger geopolitical picture of you have to have DeFi, KYC, coded regulations on the decentralized side, which will probably be powered by artificial intelligence. And you will also have central bankers that will also be looking at launching their equivalent to stablecoins. And this is all a part of ensuring that they've got the system ready for the systemic risk in the banking system and the biggest attack on banking that we'll see. So those are the larger geopolitical trends. And if you want to stay up to date with all of those things, then you have to become a subscriber to my YouTube channel. If you are not a subscriber, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all, because this is where I keep everyone up to date with all the different things. I go into the micro of what it means for you to protect yourself as an investor. Then I go into the general trends on the different companies as a shareholder in over 100 different companies in the industry. And then I always think about the country and macro picture whenever we're doing these emergency broadcasts. So make sure you catch up, because always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Those that get on the wrong side of these changes are going to get absolutely wrecked on the wrong side. Those are on the right side of these changes. I want to make sure that you have the information to do as well as you can and not suffer from all the financial anxiety that people are suffering when they're trading, speculating, jumping from thing to thing, exposed to all, their life savings in one thing. We want to make sure that everyone's really ready and prepared for these different things. We always do it with peace, love, and unity, no matter how violent and bad it gets. And so let me know in the comments section what you think about the attack, really, on stablecoins. We can look at, in future videos, the attack on the decentralized one. We covered the centralized ones here today. And let me know everything that you would like to see in future videos. So I will read those comments and I will see you on the next emergency broadcast. Hopefully we won't have to cover too many, but I'll do them every time there is big news. Peace.